In the midst of the misty moors of the English county of Suffolk, where the horizon merges with the low grey sky, stands an object that, by all laws of logic, should not exist. If you drive past on the narrow country road, you will see only massive gates and an endless wall of trees hiding the secret. Local residents call this place the Sleeping Giant. For most of the 20th century, this giant slept a deep sleep, closing its doors to prying eyes, as if guarding a secret too heavy for the understanding of an ordinary person. This is Elvedon Hall, a house that time decided to forget, but which itself forgot nothing. The history of this place is not just a chronicle of brick and limestone. It is a story about how human ego tries to outshout eternity. From the outside, a restrained, almost austere red brick mansion in the classical style presents itself to you. It looks solid, English stiff, and even a bit boring. But this facade is a brilliant deception. As soon as you cross the heavy oak threshold, reality tears apart. You expect to see dark wooden panels, portraits of ancestors, and the smell of old books, typical for an English manor. Instead, you find yourself inside a dazzling hallucination. You enter not a house, but an Indian palace. Huge arches covered with intricate carvings rise upwards, disappearing into the semi-darkness of the domes. White marble shines with a cold light, reflecting ghosts of the past. This is architectural schizophrenia. Outside, cold England. Inside, hot Punjab. Who created this paradox? Who possessed such audacity and resources to build a Taj Mahal in the midst of farmland? And why, possessing all this splendor, did the owners abandon it, leaving the halls empty for decades? To understand this drama, we need to rewind time back to the moment when ambition met tragedy. In 1863, these lands were acquired by a man whose fate was broken by the greatest empire in the world. His name was Duleep Singh. He was the last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, a boy king whom the British deprived of the throne, separated from his mother, and brought to England, turning him into a living trophy of Queen Victoria. They took everything from him, including the legendary Koh-i-Noor diamond. In return, they gave him a title, a pension, and this piece of land in Suffolk. Duleep Singh began transforming the ordinary house into his personal fantasy. He hired architect John Norton to create interiors reminiscent of the Lahore palaces that he had lost forever. It was not just a construction project. It was therapy, the cry of an exile's soul trying to reclaim a sense of home in a foreign country. The walls became covered with intricate plaster ornaments. The ceilings bloomed with golden patterns. But this was only the beginning. The Maharaja was a dreamer, broken by the system. He created the form, but could not breathe long life into it. His story ended tragically. He died in Paris, in poverty and oblivion, leaving behind a dream house that demanded a new owner. An owner with different resources and a different, firmer grip. And such a man appeared. In 1893, immediately after the Maharaja's death, a figure steps onto the stage capable of eclipsing even royal splendor. Edward Cecil Guinness, the first Earl of Iveagh, a man whose surname had by then become synonymous with dark Irish beer that had conquered the planet. Edward was not an exiled prince. He was the king of the New World, the world of industry, capital, and strategy. When he first entered the halls of Elvedon Hall and saw the Indian fantasies of his predecessor, he did not order them demolished. He smiled. He saw a challenge in it. Where the Maharaja had used painted plaster, Guinness decided to use Carrara marble. Where there was longing for the homeland, Guinness saw a stage for demonstrating his triumph. This was a clash of two worlds, the old, dying aristocracy of the East and the new, aggressive plutocracy of the West. Guinness did not buy just walls. He bought a set for his main life role. No one knew then that this pragmatic businessman would turn the estate into an architectural wonder that, 100 years later, would make the whole world wonder. How was it even possible for a private individual to build such a thing? But behind the facade of grandeur, the clockwork of inevitable emptiness was already ticking. Edward Guinness intended to build a house for eternity, unaware that he was building a mausoleum for an era that was about to vanish. The sleeping giant was only beginning to see its first dreams, and those dreams were made of gold and marble. To understand how a marble palace arose in the middle of English backwoods, one must peer into the mind of the man who paid for it. Edward Cecil Guinness was not an ordinary aristocrat who had received an inheritance and rested on his laurels. He was born in 1847 and was the great-grandson of the dynasty's founder, Arthur Guinness. But it was Edward who transformed the successful brewery into a global empire that became synonymous with Ireland. His philosophy was simple and ruthless. If you are not growing, you are dying. While the old English nobility was losing its fortunes, clinging to traditions and inefficient agriculture, Edward looked to the future. He was a man of the new era, the era of steam, steel, and global markets. His first and main weapon was the intellect of a strategist. In October of 1886, Edward made a move that shook London's financial world. He took the Guinness Company public on the stock exchange. This was the first initial public offering of a major brewery in history. The excitement was so great that the police had to block the streets around the trading venue to hold back the crowd of investors. In one day, Edward Cecil Guinness became the richest man in Ireland and one of the richest people in the world. £6 million, an unimaginable sum for that time, found themselves in his hands. These were new money, fast, liquid, ready for action. But in Victorian society, there existed a barrier that could not be breached with banknotes alone. This was the invisible glass ceiling between tradespeople and true aristocracy. For dukes and earls whose titles traced roots to the Middle Ages, Guinness remained a beer baron. His money smelled of hops and yeast, not the centuries-old dust of ancestral castles. Edward understood this perfectly. He was ambitious, but also coldly calculating. He knew that respect could not be bought directly, but conditions could be created in which it would be impossible not to show it. He needed a stage. He needed territory on which he could play by his own rules and win against the aristocrats at their own game. This is why, in 1894, his gaze fell on Elvedon Hall. Why this estate specifically? Not because of the architecture. The house left by the Maharaja was strange and eclectic. The reason was strategic. Elvedon was famous for its hunting grounds. Pheasant and partridge hunting was the main social ritual of the British elite, the golf of the 19th century. This was the place where the fates of the empire were decided, where unspoken alliances were forged, where monarchs rested from protocol. Edward Guinness did not just buy a house. He bought access to the king. His approach to managing the estate was the same as his approach to managing the factory in Dublin. Efficiency, scale, perfectionism. He did not want simply to participate in hunts. He wanted his hunts to be the best in the world. He began buying up adjacent lands, expanding the holdings to 17,000 acres. This is nearly 70 square kilometers of private territory. He hired an army of gamekeepers, introduced scientific methods of game breeding, and turned the sandy soils of Suffolk into an ideal shooting range. Edward Guinness was a paradoxical figure. On one hand, a tough capitalist, counting every penny in the company reports. On the other, a man ready to spend insane sums on creating an illusion. He understood the psychology of power. To be accepted as one of their own, you must surpass them in their own luxury. He saw Elvedon not as a cozy nest, but as a tool. Every brick, every tree in the forest, every servant was supposed to work toward one goal: to elevate the status of the Guinness family to unattainable heights. But this plan had one flaw. The Maharaja's house was too cramped for the ambitions of the Irish billionaire. The interiors, created for a homesick Indian prince, were unsuitable for receiving the British monarch and his entourage. Edward needed something more. He needed a miracle. And to create this miracle, he required a partner, muse, and ally, all in one person. A person who would fill these cold strategic calculations with life and meaning. The history of Elvedon was preparing to make its sharpest turn. In the equation of Edward Guinness's absolute success, one critical variable was missing. He had the money, the strategy too, but to turn cold capital into living social influence, another talent was required. This talent was possessed by his wife, Adelaide Maria Guinness, whom in close circles they called by the affectionate nickname Dodo. If Edward was the engine of this empire, Adelaide was its rudder. Their marriage, contracted as early as 1873, was not just a family union, but a merging of ambitions. Adelaide perfectly understood the rules of high society. To hold the attention of kings, it is not enough simply to be rich. You need to be indispensable. You need to create a world that monarchs will want to return to again and again. It was Adelaide who became the catalyst for the grand transformation of Elvedon Hall. At the end of the 19th century, the Guinness family's friendship with the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, and his son George was growing ever stronger. But the old Maharaja's house, for all its exoticism, was too cramped for the royal entourage. The king does not travel alone. An entire court moves with him. The Guinnesses faced a challenge: either build a new house, destroying history, or achieve the impossible, expand the existing exoticism to imperial scales. They chose the second path. This decision became the moment when Elvedon ceased to be just a house and began to transform into a legend. In 1899, Edward hires the Scottish architect William Young, famous for constructing monumental buildings in Glasgow. The task set before Young was paradoxical: to take the Maharaja's Indian jewel box and place it inside an English cathedral. This was a project of merging two worlds, with no analogues in the architecture of that time. The construction lasted 4 years, until 1903, and became a true logistical feat. Hundreds of workers labored over erecting the new wing, which was to harmoniously connect with the old building. Here, the genius duality of Guinness's concept was revealed. Outside, the new additions precisely replicated the restrained Italianate style of red brick. For a passerby or casual guest, the house remained the embodiment of British stability. But this was a mask. Inside, architects and decorators created a space designed to stun any entrant. Guinness decided not just to preserve Dalip Singh's Indian style, but to elevate it to the absolute. Where the Maharaja had used imitation, Guinness demanded authenticity. This was the physical embodiment of British imperialism, a modest English shell concealing within itself the riches and aesthetics of the colonized East. This architectural marriage of West and East perfectly reflected the Guinnesses' new position in society. They were a bridge between the old world of aristocracy, valuing traditions, the house's exterior, and the new world of global capital, capable of buying any luxury, the interiors. The house became a tool of diplomacy. Specifically for royal visits, a separate wing was designed with luxurious bedrooms where every detail screamed comfort. The latest technologies of the time were introduced: electricity, central heating, modern plumbing, all that which was so often lacking in the old, drafty castles of hereditary nobility. By 1903, the transformation was complete. Elvedon Hall became, perhaps, the most perfect party house in British history. But these were not just entertainments. This was a stage on which the Guinnesses received kings not as subjects, but as masters of the situation. Adelaide conducted the receptions, where menus were composed in French and wines were older than many guests, while Edward organized hunts that all of Europe talked about. Old money met new, princes met brewers, and India met England under one roof. The symbol of this union became an invisible but powerful detail: security and comfort. King George V loved this place so much that he came here every year. For him, Elvedon became a refuge where he could be himself, surrounded by luxury that even Buckingham Palace could not always offer at that time. The Guinnesses won. They did not storm the gates of high society. They built a palace to which high society came of its own accord. But behind this triumph lurked irony. Having created the perfect house for others, the Guinnesses built a space that was too vast to be simply a cozy family hearth. They created a monument that required the constant presence of crowds to feel alive. And the heart of this monument, the Marble Hall, was preparing to reveal its hypnotic power. Imagine that you are standing before the main entrance. Your hand touches the cold bronze handle. You push the heavy leaf and take a step from the gray English reality straight into the center of architectural madness. The first thing that strikes your senses is the light. It pours from everywhere, reflecting off thousands of facets of snow-white stone. You are in the famous Marble Hall. This is the heart of Elvedon, and it is the most accurate psychological portrait of Edward Guinness that one can imagine. If outside the house pretends to be a modest gentleman, here it screams about its true nature: boundless power and the desire to conquer the world. The scale of this room overwhelms. Above your head soars a dome to a height of 80 feet. This is the height of a modern 7-story building, hidden inside a private house. But the most astonishing thing here is not the height, but the material. Walls, columns, arches, balustrades, all this is made of the purest Carrara marble brought from Italy. Think about the logistics of the early 20th century. Guinness did not just order finishes. He organized the transportation of hundreds of tons of stone across all of Europe to assemble them here, in the backwoods of Suffolk. This was a message. For a man with his resources, nothing is impossible. Where Maharaja Duleep Singh used painted plaster, creating an illusion of luxury, Guinness used real stone. This was an assertion of the superiority of reality over dream, hard currency over empty title. The acoustics in the hall are such that a whisper in one corner is heard in another, as if the walls are eavesdropping on your secrets. This space is not intended for cozy family evenings. It is created to make a person feel small. Passing through rows of arches in the style of the great Mughals, you see the most intricate carving, executed by 700 masters. Every petal on the stone flower, every geometric pattern is hand-carved. This is a hymn to perfectionism. Guinness paid for every square inch of surface to receive attention. This was architecture of total control. From the cold, echoing marble hall, you enter a suite of living rooms, and here the mood changes sharply. The contrast stuns. If the hall is a temple, then the drawing rooms and library are caves of comfort, paneled with expensive wood. Here it smells of old wax, leather, and smoke from fireplaces, in which, it seemed, entire trees were burned to dispel the dampness of the vast rooms. Along the walls stretch endless corridors hung with tapestries and paintings by old masters, another way to buy a history that the family did not have by right of blood. Furniture brought from France and Italy stood here, as mute witnesses to the fact that the Guinnesses could afford the best heritage of Europe. The house was designed as a complex machine for receiving guests. It contained more than 100 rooms. For King George V and Queen Mary, an entire wing was allocated, where the bathrooms were equipped with the latest plumbing available at the time. Edward Guinness understood the psychology of comfort. To retain a monarch, you need to provide conditions better than those at his own home. Servants, numbering more than 100 during major receptions, moved through a system of hidden corridors and staircases, appearing as if from thin air to refill a glass or adjust a pillow, and disappearing just as unobtrusively. This was a theatre where hosts and guests performed on stage, while the support mechanism operated behind the scenes. But wandering through these halls with your mind's eye, you begin to notice a strange detail. There is too much grandeur here, and too little life. Mirrors in gilded frames reflected endless enfilades, but the human figure got lost in them. The fireplaces were enormous, but could they warm the soul? Edward Guinness built this house as proof of his triumph, but in the pursuit of scale, he created a golden cage. Every interior detail, from the copper doors with Indian ornamentation to the heavy velvet drapes, symbolized the weight of his ambitions. This house oppressed. It demanded conformity. Living here meant always being on display, always keeping your back straight, always playing a role. And soon, when the music fades, this architectural psychology will play a cruel joke on the inhabitants. Grandeur demands sacrifices, and Elvedon was preparing to take its toll. It seemed that the golden summer of the Edwardian era would never end. In the early 20th century, Elvedon Hall was the center of the universe for the elite. Champagne flowed like a river, shots from the hunt sounded like festive salutes, and the laughter of the empire's most influential people echoed off the marble walls. But any peak is a harbinger of decline. For Edward Guinness, a man accustomed to controlling markets and exchanges, the moment came to collide with a force that could not be bribed or outsmarted: time. The first crack in the impeccable facade appeared in August of 1914. The start of the First World War did not just change the political map, it destroyed the very way of life for which Elvedon had been built. Young gamekeepers and servants who kept this complex mechanism in motion traded their liveries for military uniforms and went off to France, many forever. The enormous house, designed for hundreds of people, began to empty. The grandeur of the halls, which had once inspired awe, now began to oppress with its meaninglessness. What need is there for a marble palace when the world is burning in flames? But the real blow, which turned Elvedon from a house of triumph into a house of loneliness, was personal. In 1916, Adelaide, the beloved Dodo, dies. She was not just a wife, she was the soul of this stone giant. It was her energy that filled the cold halls with warmth. It was for her social triumph that Edward erected these walls. With her departure, the balance was disrupted. Edward Guinness, one of the richest people on the planet, was left alone in his Indian temple. Here we encounter the profound moral ambivalence of this story. Edward spent his life and fortune to build a monument to his success. But in the end, this monument became his golden cage. The next 11 years, until his death in 1927, he lived in a house that was too vast for one man. The marble hall, created for crowds, turned into an echoing resonator of solitude. Servants whispered that the old earl wandered the enfilades, and the sound of his footsteps drowned in the emptiness of the dome. Was he happy with his millions in those moments? Or did he realize the cruel irony? He bought history, but could not buy time. After Edward's death in 1927, the estate passed to his son, Rupert Guinness, the second Earl of Ivy. And here enters the second key character of this phase, Rupert's wife, Lady Gwendolen. This couple differed radically from their parents. If Edward and Adelaide aspired to external splendor and recognition from the aristocracy, then Rupert and Gwendolen were people of action and duty. Gwendolen would become a member of Parliament, and Rupert would devote himself to science and agriculture. For the new generation, Elvedon Hall became a most complex moral dilemma. On one hand, it was a great heritage, a symbol of the family's power. On the other, this was a white elephant, a monstrously expensive anachronism to maintain. The world had changed. The aristocracy was losing power, taxes were rising, and maintaining a staff of servants necessary for servicing marble floors and polishing silver was becoming ethically and financially questionable. Rupert and Gwendolen looked at this palace not as a dream, but as a responsibility. In their actions, we see the beginning of transformation. They did not abandon the house, but changed its essence. The hunts continued, but now they became more pragmatic, turning into a business and a scientific experiment in managing the grounds. The glamour of balls gave way to business meetings and political discussions. But the house resisted. Its architecture was too specific, too tailored to the ego of one creator. Elvedon was built for a party lasting a lifetime, and it did not know how to be simply a cozy family home. This internal conflict between form and content grew with each year. The Guinness family tried to adapt the Eastern fantasy to the realities of the 20th century, but it was like trying to wear a coronation mantle while working in the garden. The house's grandeur became its curse. It demanded a lavish lifestyle that no longer existed. And while Rupert and Gwendolen tried to find new meaning for this giant, clouds of a new, even more terrible war were already gathering on the horizon, which would put an end to Elvedon's history as a residential home. The sleeping giant was preparing to close its eyes, perhaps forever. Therein lay the tragedy. The house was too beautiful to demolish and too impractical to live in. It was stuck between worlds, just like its creators. The crisis that finally decided the fate of Elvedon Hall did not come from within the family, but from the sky. 1939, the start of the Second World War, became the moment when the era of luxury was officially cancelled. Vast estates across Britain were requisitioned for military needs, and Elvedon was no exception. But fate had in store for this house a special role, which added yet another layer of surrealism to its already incredible history. The sleeping giant awoke, but not to the clink of crystal glasses, but to the roar of aircraft engines. Elvedon became the headquarters of the U.S. Army Air Force's 3rd Air Division. Imagine this picture. Under the vaults of the Marble Hall, inspired by the Taj Mahal, where kings in tuxedos once strolled, now American officers in field uniforms walked. Where pheasant hunts were discussed, now carpet bombings of Germany were planned. Indian arches and domes became witnesses to strategies that changed a course of world history. Rough army boots clattered on Italian marble, and the smell of cheap tobacco and machine oil mixed with the aroma of centuries-old dust. This was a collision of two realities: the fragile beauty of the past, and the brutal functionality of war. When the war ended in 1945, the soldiers left, leaving behind silence. But this was already a different silence. The world had changed irrevocably. Britain was devastated, inheritance taxes soared to the heavens, and the class of servants ready to work for pennies and live in attics disappeared as a phenomenon. Rupert Guinness, the second Earl of Ivy, faced a choice that destroyed hundreds of other aristocratic houses in those years. Try to revive a dead way of life and go bankrupt, or demolish the house to avoid taxes. Rupert chose a third path, a path of radical pragmatism, which both saved Elvedon and simultaneously turned it into a ghost. The family made a decision. They would not live in the main house. It was too expensive, too cold, and too meaningless in the new egalitarian world. They moved to more modest buildings on the estate grounds. And the palace itself? They simply locked it up. This was the moment of great transformation. The enormous house was not demolished, not sold for a hotel or school. It was mothballed. Furniture was covered with white sheets, shutters closed, water shut off. Elvedon turned into the largest and most expensive time capsule in England. In this decision was revealed the new philosophy of the Guinness family's wealth. If Edward built for display, Rupert acted for preservation. He understood that true ownership is not use, but stewardship. From the late 40s until the 80s, the house stood virtually untouched. While other historic mansions were demolished by bulldozers, in the 1950s in England, one country house disappeared every 5 days. Elvedon survived precisely because it was forgotten. The family had enough money not to sell it, and enough wisdom not to try to modernize it. Inside, time had stopped. The library with thousands of volumes, wardrobes with Edwardian-era clothing, kitchens with copper utensils, everything remained in its place, awaiting owners who would never return. Rupert Guinness directed his energy to the land. He transformed the estate into a cutting-edge agricultural enterprise, Elvedon Farms. This became the new legacy. Instead of spending capital on heating a marble mausoleum, he made the land work. This was a transcendence of purpose, from selfish consumption of resources to their production. The house, meanwhile, turned into a sacred relic, a huge treasure chest standing amid fields of potatoes and carrots. By the time of Rupert's death in 1967, Elvedon had already acquired mythical status among local residents. No one knew what was happening behind the gates. Legends grew like weeds. They said that inside, the table settings from the last dinner still stood on the tables. Reality was more prosaic, but no less dramatic. The house was simply sleeping. It became a monument to ambitions that had outgrown their creators. The third Earl of Ivy continued this policy of non-interference. But every story must have a resolution. Things locked in darkness begin to demand light. And this light was to pour in May of 1984, when the doors finally swung open to forever change the fate of the sleeping giant. The resolution of this story came in May of 1984. These were the days when the sleeping giant finally opened its doors, but not to receive kings, and not to give its treasures to the world. Christie's auction house announced the sale of the contents of Elvedon Hall. This event became a national sensation. Thousands of people rushed to Suffolk, creating traffic jams on country roads. They came not just to buy antiques, they came to peer through the keyhole of history, which had been locked for nearly half a century. What they saw was overwhelming. Inside, time had truly stopped. Visitors walked through rooms where newspapers from the 1930s still lay on the tables, and in wardrobes hung tailcoats eaten by moths, but retaining the shape of their owners. It was like opening a pharaoh's tomb, only instead of the sands of Egypt, green English lawns surrounded it. More than 2,000 lots went under the hammer. Furniture, paintings, carpets, dishes. The sale lasted several days and brought in more than £6 million sterling. With each strike of the auctioneer's hammer, a piece of Edward Guinness's soul left this place. The house emptied, freeing itself from the weight of the past to remain alone with its architecture. But here the story makes its final, most surprising turn. The emptied Elvedon did not die. It found a new life, which perhaps suits it even better than the role of a residential house. It became the greatest set in the world. Today, Elvedon Hall is a star of the silver screen. Stanley Kubrick chose precisely these surreal interiors for his last masterpiece, Eyes Wide Shut, to depict a world of secret societies and extravagant luxury. Lara Croft ran through its halls in Tomb Raider. The series The Crown used it for filming scenes in Ghana because there is no other place in England that could so convincingly play the role of a colonial palace. Therein lies a deep irony and ultimate justice. Edward Guinness built this house as a theatrical stage for demonstrating his grandeur. A century later, the house literally became a stage. It was too unreal for life, too grandiose for coziness. Therefore, it found its refuge in the world of illusions, in cinema. Reality rejected it, but art embraced it. Today, the estate is owned by the 4th Earl of Ivy, Arthur Edward Guinness. He, like his ancestors, proved that the family knows how to adapt. Elvedon Farms is a thriving agribusiness, the largest producer of root vegetables in the country. The land works, generating profit. And the house? The house stands in the midst of these fields, majestic and empty. It is maintained in perfect condition. Its roof does not leak, its marble shines, but no one lives in it. This is a monument to the very nature of human ambition. The story of Elvedon Hall is a mirror of The Great Gatsby, only embodied in stone and stretched over a century. Like J. Gatsby, Edward Guinness believed that he could rewrite his past and buy the future by building a castle full of light and music. He believed that if he created a grand enough stage, the world would recognize him as king. And he succeeded. But the price of this success turned out to be unexpected. He created a house that outlived not only himself, but also the era for which it was created. What does this story teach us today? That our ambitions often create structures that we are powerless to control. We build our palaces, be they careers, corporations, or houses, hoping to find eternity in them. But eternity is indifferent to our plans. Elvedon's marble hall stands today in silence, reflecting the sun's rays falling through the dome. It no longer hears the laughter of kings or the whispers of conspirators. It hears only the command, "Action!" and the footsteps of tourists, rarely admitted inside. Elvedon Hall remains the sleeping giant, a reminder that even the greatest money in the world cannot buy life, but can buy immortality. Only this immortality is cold, stone, and lonely. Edward Cecil Guinness wanted to be remembered, and his wish came true. Amid the fields of Suffolk stands his white marble dream, which will never wake, but which is impossible to forget. And as long as this house stands, the story of the boy Maharaja who lost his throne and the beer king who found a palace will continue to resonate, echoing off its endless, empty walls.